Howdy folks, we are here in this video with the goal of building out a solid boilerplate for just a Node Express backend. It can include whatever database you want. I may go over how I might set my MySQL database up for my particular students from the Full Stack Bootcamp, but I got asked this question on not too long, a couple days ago, and it's from an alumni of our Full Stack Development course asking, hey, is there a version of the boilerplate with just backend packages? And I decided to, rather than just make a boilerplate and let him start cloning it or forking it or whatever, I would rather actually explain the build process of how to make our own here, a solid Node Express boilerplate, which should be in the description and title as well if you're wondering what kind of server we're building. Yeah, and rather than just, like I said, make the repo and let him clone it and do whatever they wanted to, I instead decided to make this a video series. It might be 1, 2, or 3, or depending on if it's popular or not, more videos as I build this whole thing out. But the idea here is to basically build like a mega server that can act as a solid backbone for a lot of our portfolio projects. This is something me and my co-instructor here at Covalence, Andrew, have done ourselves. For all of our personal portfolio projects, he and I have built like our own CMS, basically, like content management system. It's just like a giant mega server that has a whole bunch of API endpoints for any project I'm going to be running. It's quick and easy to add some CRUD routes with some new tables for our MySQL or Postgres databases. And then from there, we just build whatever client-side code we want. Like if I'm going to build like a native app to goof on my Android device, I'll use React Native and build like a little app for like taking pictures of cats and geotagging them on my walks around our neighborhoods. That's something, a fun little project, and that mega server has the routes for that. I built a workout tracking app that also uses that same mega server. And like I said, it's just very convenient to not have to build out your servers over and over again. So with that little preamble out of the way, let's just dive on in and answer the student question here with a fun video. I'm going to be starting out here in my terminal and building this from total scratch like I have in my Full Stack CRUD App from Scratch series. So we're going to make this directory, and we're going to be calling it our, I guess, boiler server. That sounds good enough for me as a name right there. We're going to cd into this sucker, npm init-y. I tried cleaning out my keyboard, but there's something making the N key hit twice. That's going to be very, very annoying throughout this video if it happens. I thought I had fixed it by taking the keycap off and looking for any kind of smudging of dirt, which of course there was dirt and cat hair, but it doesn't seem to fix the issue. Maybe it's time for a new mechanical keyboard. Always got to add one to the quiver, right folks? All right, so we've added a node to this project by initializing npm with the -y flag to make it easy to answer all of yes to those questions. And now we can just kind of get up and running. I'm going to go ahead and install a couple packages out the get-go for regular dependencies. We are going to use .env to set up our environment variables. Surprise, surprise. I'll be building out this server with Express to get up and running. So we're talking about that right there. And as an example, I do need to show y'all how I'm going to set up something called loaders. So I will set up my MySQL database. Don't worry, I'm not going to be, I'm going to pick some random database connection I already have for my MySQL server. It doesn't really matter what the project is. I just need it here for an example. And I guess we might get into it in a second or third video if we want to, but I'm not going to bother. But that's fine. We're going to start with these basic dependencies right here, get a server up and running, and show y'all the structure that that we're going to approach with this particular project. Okay, so for development dependencies, we need to add a couple of things when we're not fat fingering hotkeys. I've tried warming up my fingers and playing like a little typing game before doing this video because coming in cold to try and type a whole bunch is never a good thing, but for some reason, these sausages are not one to cooperate today, right? So, for development dependencies, we're going to have the types for Node if we need to use them in any of like our configurations, our types for Express, our types for MySQL. So there we go. Obviously, we're going to be using nodemon to restart our servers over and over again. We'll go into that. I'll be using tsnode. This is a great little script here. Let's see if I can pull up a window real quick. Not script, it's actually a little whole package in library. There we go. tsnode, let's go! I don't know why it didn't go to the tsnode page. There it is. Yeah, so tsnode is a fantastic library for being able to use just-in-time transformations for TypeScript into JavaScript. It also provides a REPL for node.js for TypeScript execution. It's fantastic. This way we don't have to do an entire build process like we do in our other boilerplate in our full stack curriculum. which is a combined monorepo of both a React client side and Express backend that our students use for a lot of their projects, which is why they were wondering, hey, what if I wanted to serve it just at the backend? That's what spawned this question. Yeah, so we're going to be using TS Node for quick TypeScript development when we're building out our servers without having to constantly compile everything, type check every single error every single time before it even bothers compiling, and then having to run nodemon on that outputted code. It's nice that we can just natively have it transpile for us right there. So we're going to be using this package to do that, and I'll show you all how to do that, well, coming up shortly, right? Yeah, so from there, we also need, obviously we're going to need TypeScript so we can actually build some stuff out here. And that should be enough of our development dependencies to get this sucker up and running. And this video, like I said, I won't go into too far detail because they did ask for a kind of like a bare bones boilerplate for a server, and that's what I'm going to try and take y'all. So from here, we need to make a couple files. We got to make a tsconfig JSON, and then something that my students don't know, but you can actually add custom commands to how nodemon is going to be executing and running our auto restarts on our server, for example. We can tell it to use TS node and things like that. And you can actually pass individual flags, like passing flags like we did here with installing development dependencies to NPM. We can pass flags to TS node, nodemon, and things like that for it to follow certain configurations and do extra optional configurations and things like that. But we can also specify them from JSON files, so we have even more bloat hanging out in the root of our projects, go figure, right? And we're also going to add our classic .env and .gitignore for this particular project as well. Very good. Okay, cool. So with those out of the way, let's go ahead and also make a source directory. That's where we're going to be adding, surprise, all of our source code. And we'll have a build folder that should be built out by our compiling process. So wunderbar, let's get going. In my code editor, which is in the other window, because I use it for notes sometimes, there we go. Like, I don't have a script on these videos a lot of the time. I do like a quick rehearsal, and I keep notes on my side monitor. If you ever see me glancing over, it's to try and keep myself relatively decently on track without getting too lost in the sauce as I what's it called? As I ramble and rave and try and code at the same time. It's sometimes difficult to keep my head on straight, y'all know. So right now, I'm going to just go ahead and add these particular things for my Mac users just to avoid that file being constantly added to every single git push. We don't want to have it to happen there, so we're going to ignore those. And I'm going to build this out and I have like a gitignore I basically copied all my projects. I don't remember where I found it. I think it was someone else's repository that I found that had all this stuff inside of it, and I would just copy and paste it between all my projects. So when I push this to GitHub and include it in the description below this video, which by the way, make sure to like, comment, subscribe. You'll see the full env paste that I normally do, but at the very least, I always start with these. I always make sure any environment variables aren't being pushed, and then this annoying, if you're on Mac OS, little file appearing wherever it comes up, right? So, all right, cool. And I'll add, there'll be comments in that, like the production ready env. I just realized I'm in the env and not in my gitignore. Whoops, there we go. So this is what it should be, the gitignore, right? This will have comments mentioning like all the stuff and why they are being ignored and not being pushed to GitHub, right? But this is like the bare bones, hence the name of the video, stuff I normally start with here, right? Okay, so from here, what I like to do is we need to head to, let's go to nodemon JSON. And what we're going to be doing here is telling our nodemon script when the time comes to run it, what it needs to do. So we can tell it what specifically we want it to watch. And we're going to say, look for the source folder. I realize we're in JSON, source folder, and our .env file. This is very convenient because a lot of the times my students in our full stack development course, when they're building out their full stack projects, you know, they'll change a value in their environment variables or add something, and then they'll recompile, nodemon will restart, and they're wondering why it's not working. It's because you're not watching for changes in your environment variable file, so it's not actively restarting the project. So if I change an environment variable, the project should recompile and restart because that is a pretty big change that could affect our entire project. So we're going to tell nodemon not to just watch everything in our source folder, but also our environment variable file. Little pro tip that I like to add here. We can tell it to watch certain extensions. We'll say JS, TS, and JSON. Anytime one of those changes, we should also retranspile here. We can tell it to ignore certain things as well. I will go ahead and say for this, I don't have any intention on adding testing, but it's a good idea to always kind of follow this right here if you're using TypeScript and testing and things like that. This is just making sure that we're not rewriting the project when we add or change in tests and things like that. So that's where we're going to add that. And then finally, we have a execute property in this nodemon JSON that will be, hey, when I say run nodemon, this is what you're supposed to do. So I'm going to say run ts node. And with ts node, we want it to transpile only. And if you're wondering what this means in ts node speech, it's also, you can do a capital T, I believe. Transpile only means that we want it to not do any real crazy type checking. We can include a linter, and our VS Code editor can have really good type checking built in for us as well. But basically, this makes sure that it just quickly transpiles the TS to JS and runs the code right away, rather than having to crash our server and exit out every single time there's a minuscule type error, which can be very, very annoying when you're trying to develop things quickly. So we're passing this transpile only flag in development only. When we run our build process, it should specifically type check everything, but when we're just developing, it's very aggravating to have to stop and look at our terminal every single time we have a singular type error that's of the most, it can be like the most minutia detail ever, or maybe just like a library that has a mismatched typing and all of a sudden the whole thing crashes and you're screwed and you're trying to figure out why. Passing this flag here allows us to skip that particular problem in this process. From there, we're going to be telling it to watch our source folder, and in particular a file called app.ts, where our project will be running and starting our server. That'll conclude that for the nodemon JSON configuration. In our TS config, again, this is one I ended up finding that I copy between a couple different builds. So we're going to take a look at that here as well. We'll say, need some compiler options. Our target is going to be ES 2017. We'll go ahead and say for our libraries, our specified set of libraries, I want to have ES 2017. 2071. We want our ES next .async. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Iterable. There we go. From there, we need to specify where we can find some type roots, which I'm going to say look into node underscore modules /@types. And also we'll have our own folder probably in source types to find out where our type roots can be. That'll help us be able to customize, like, global namespaces and modules and things like that for our types there. So as always, we're going to allow synthetic default imports to be true, so we can do import express from express and not have to do asterisk as stuff all the time. I might goof with this later, so we're going to go ahead and add decorators. That's for adding just, again, experimental stuff for draft. If I get into that, we'll get into that. So I'm going to add that here for now. And if we do that, I need to emit decorator metadata. There's actually a cool one I found here called force consistent casting and filing names, which I think is pretty cool. That way it makes sure that everything is consistent when we're doing our import statements when it comes to file names and things like that. I didn't really realize that was a TS config thing, because I know in some OSs, like, it will care about case, meaning you could have an uppercase or lowercase import and the path will work just fine. And there's other OSs that are like, no, that's not going to work on me. So this is a cool option to make sure that ends up staying true. Our module resolution, we'll use node. For the module, we'll do common.js. This is, again, just making sure that we cover our bases and our import statements so we don't have to write asterisk as everything, which is that traditional TypeScript import. There is actually a cool, I use pretty, right? I use prettier to format my document, and I realized there's a cool TS config here that will actually colorize your compiler errors and makes them prettier and easier to look at in the terminal, which I thought was pretty cool. We need to tell it to include a source map so we can actually trace our errors when our JavaScript code is running back to where the error probably occurred in the TypeScript file and line of code. So again, this is taking what is outputted by our TypeScript compiler and being able to map it back to our TypeScript code to actually help find errors. We got to tell it where to compile all this stuff. We'll say put it out into a build directory. From there, we're going to do allow.js true. Again, I'm not using, and the way I use TypeScript is more as a IntelliSense booster and general guide to my code, meaning I will add any's types to get my code working as best as I can. And as I get it working and figure out how it's working or what I'm trying to do, then I begin adding more specific types for future development purposes, other people trying to help me out and stuff like that. We're going to add a no emit because I don't want any errors being constantly emitting and goofing me up in the build process. And then we have to add ES module interop as true, and that's what allows us to correctly do just our clean import thing from thing style import statements instead of having to do the TypeScript asterisk as is, right? Okay, so we got to tell it what we need to include here for our compiling process, which will be an array, which will say our source, and then any recursive tree in there, right? So that tells it that anything in our source folder and subdirectories and so on and so forth needs to be included in the TypeScript process. And we also need to exclude a couple of things, which will be node_module. Surprise, surprise. Don't need to recompile that entire folder every time. And then if we have a tests folder, we're going to exclude that because they don't have any impact on the build process. So they shouldn't be included in the process to build our server. So that's a pretty decent starting point for our TS config. Again, not these particular ones aren't necessary, but I'm including there in case we get that far in this video series. So that sets up those things. Now we actually need to set up our package JSON and the scripts it needs to run in order to get this project up and off the ground. So we'll have, our all important build script, which will simply tell the local installed TSC TypeScript compiler to compile, and it should find and follow the logic in the tsconfig JSON. That's going to be for our production build when time comes, like if we're going to Heroku or render or something like that. That's where those are going to be included. And then here for our dev, this is where it's nice and simple, where I simply tell it to run nodemon, and it will find that nodemon JSON configuration file and follow the rules that we have set within. Again, you could pass a lot of these as flags on the command line here, but I've learned that that gets messy quickly, and I've learned that I've kind of began to like these configuration files to make my scripts in the package JSON be a lot simpler here. I'll fill out some keywords and like main and description stuff a little bit later, but for now, probably when I just push to GitHub, so I won't include it in the video since it's kind of pointless. But for now, that should be almost enough to get up and running off the ground here. So let's see if we can achieve that. Like I said, we're going to have our app TS file be the entry point for our application here. From there, we're going to test our import express from express. We're going to, and this is something that a lot of my students don't see us do when they're trying to learn the concepts of full stack development. We are going to be trying to make a lot of our files run as functions that we daisy chain together or just call from that file immediately like we will here to call start server. And the reason I want to do this is because if we're going to be adding testing at a later date, it's so much easier and faster to test things and run things by wrapping things in functions and calling them rather than having a whole bunch of just like plain written code like they may do from our full stack development camp. So we're taking a turn in how we approach our build here in this particular server series. So from here, let's just see if I have everything up and running here. We're going to run a simple console log called test. And what I want to do is head to my terminal, and we're going to run npm run dev and see what happens. All right. Righto, so check it out. It transpiled the code. It ran a test for me. And by transpile only, it's not putting out a build process. We see that build folder hasn't come around yet. So it's just kind of building, it's just transpiling it really quickly for me. And if I switch it to testing and save it, bada bing, bada boom, looks like we are solid and ready to go here. All right. Now, actually building out the server, here's what we're going to do to do that. Const app equals express to call and build out our express app. From here, we're going to do an app.listen. We're going to build out that environment variables file here in just a moment. I always like to give myself a positive message that says server running on port 3000. We'll include that a little bit later. And then something else that I like to include as well is some kind of logic here. We're going to subscribe to listen to the error event in case one happens on our server. And that provides a callback with the error should it occur. I'm going to console log the error message instead of the full error object for now. And we're going to run a process.exit code of 1. What this means is this will stop the server as fast as possible if an error happens to occur, so we can debug it and move on rather than having it try and hobble along. So the concept here is basically fail fast. if it's going to fail, have it fail fast so we can then go debug what the problem is quickly, right? So that's where we're going to include this on error subscribe this listener here that says if this event is emitted, our app will get the error, log it, and close itself down as fast as humanly possible in order for us to debug what the hell is going on. So fail fast is the key here. Taking a look at our terminal. Ignore the the warning here. The warning I had right there is because I have autosave enabled in my VS Code window, meaning that as I type something and stop to describe what I'm doing, it'll autosave and then try and run it and then fail because I haven't finished typing and while I'm talking here. So that's why you'll see sometimes errors that you may not be getting in your terminal. So don't worry about that. Okay, but yeah, guess what? We have our server theoretically just up and running and good to go now. I mean, this is incredibly bare bones, since this is probably not a good place to stop. So I'm going to go ahead and include the next part of the process that I'm probably going to take in consideration here. In that, let's go ahead and build out our config folder. We're going to provide ourselves an index.ts as well inside of that right there. And then here's where we're going to import and use .env, surprise, surprise, from .env.config. And we're going to export by default out an object that will have all of our various properties and things we need to care about in this project. So it's going to start out small and then probably over time get to be built pretty large. So interestingly enough, we probably want to include this as well. This should return to us. What is a return type? Yeah, it puts out a .env .env config output, which I believe if it doesn't find one, it'll have, how did I manage to typo that? It'll have a property called error. So we're going to say if envfound.error exists, that means we got a problem. So we're going to log, or we don't have to log anything because our process exit on error should throw that. So I will throw a new error that our error listener back in our start server function will be looking for. And well, if there's no env file found, it should log that and crash the process entirely because, well, it's going to be pretty dependent on our env file being found. So I didn't realize how many times I actually hit the letter N in development here to be annoying with that double N thing on my keyboard that I can't seem to fix. No env file found will be our error message. There we go. So again, crash fast is what we're doing here. So let's go ahead and move our port into our environment variable file here. Interestingly enough, I want to include, let's see. Yeah, okay, so we'll say we'll have a port right here that will be 3000. Surprise, surprise. That's what our beautiful environment variable file is going to look like. Now, environment variable values are being interpreted and brought in as string values, so you have to be careful with types occasionally and things like that. So we're going to go ahead and include a port property. So config.port will be a process.env.port, and not only that, we should probably make sure it's parsed to an integer of base 10. So we're going to say parse int that value with the radix of 10, right? So it doesn't default to 10, I don't think, so be careful with that. And we're doing a base 10 number system, decimal number system, so we'll pass in 10 right there to make sure it gets parsed to the correct number of 3000 with no kind of errors. Okay, something else we should also probably do here in this particular project is, if it's not set up already, process.env.nodeenv. Now, you can include this like on your Windows OS or even from the command line perspective that says use nodeenv of production, or have it default to development so it'll access to change certain aspects of our environment variable should we need to. So we're going to make sure that's included right there, where if it'll be production, for example, like when we'll deploy this somewhere. But if it's not, it should default to development. I'm pretty sure I set up an environment variable on my Windows OS called nodeenv that is set to development by default to make sure that, again, the environments are listed correctly and the value is being interpreted correctly well, depending on production or development environments there. So, okay, that's going to be the basic of our .env file right here. We're going to go back to our app.ts and give this sucker a go. Import our config from the config directory and the index file inside of there. From there, instead of this 3000, we're going to include config.port and change this to be interpolated as config.port as well to make sure she's up and running. So there we go. And yeah, we are up and running, no problem. I changed my environment variable file. I had to make a config folder, and we are now pretty much good to go from there, which I think is pretty dang cool, right? Okay. And depending on, I mean, do I want to talk about default? Nah, that's fine. Yeah, if you want to do named imports, I've also personally started doing those a lot more as well, meaning I don't do default level exports a lot in my personal coding just because I like having the IntelliSense correctly autocomplete the things for me and not having weird aliases all over the place. It's just a personal choice. We're going to leave it as default for here. That's totally fine. With that config folder built out now, we need to worry about a few more things moving forward. I want to keep things loaded as modules, right? That configure my entire app for things like Express, MySQL, Passport, etc. I want to keep things loading quickly and in bits and pieces and not all at once. This will keep things moving very fast and also crashing fast should that occur on our applications. What do I mean by that? Let's go take a look. I'm going to have a folder called loaders here for this structure. And the purpose of loaders is, again, going to be keeping things piecemealed, fast, and fun. We're going to have a MySQL loader. The index will be combining them all. And we're going to have an Express loader. And eventually a Passport and whatever other things you add here at once. Like I'll have one for cron jobs. I may have one for pub sub stuff. Like there's a whole bunch of different things you could do here. But I'm going to give you, like, again, bare bones. I want to give you all a basic setup of how I might achieve this here. So for Express, this is where I'm going to be customizing the app that we built in app.ts. Again, this is the whole application, not just Express, right? The whole thing itself. Now I'm going to customize where it's built here, and we'll pass this app as an argument all the way down to this little guy right here at some point in time. So we'll say export const. And again, like export default, because the name shouldn't really matter, right? We'll call it Express Loader. But since I decided to do a default export for my config, I might as well try and be consistent in my coding here. Surprise, surprise, right? So we're going to export out a function that will do some stuff here. And we're going to mark it as async, as an async function. I think we do it this way with defaults. I can't quite remember. Is it happy or is it angry about something now? Okay, good. Just making sure that there's a syntax error. Oh, because I am doing a fat arrow. There we go. Because I didn't write the function keyword, so I'm kind of stupid right there. It doesn't really matter whether you use an arrow or like a function syntax. Again, a personal choice that I tend to make these days is for top level functions, I will use the function syntax, and for anything inward of that scope, I'll use arrow functions instead. So we're going to keep my own logic consistent here. And we'll say we're going to pass in, we can pass in multiple arguments. So in the future, we may pass in more than just our application. So I like to do objects where applicable as well. And that app will be an application here for TypeScript types. All right, import Express from Express, because we're going to be using that library here, and we're going to import that type as well in particular from Express. And we'll say this should be an application right there. Or is it an Express application for that type? I can never remember. Oh, it's an Express. Hold on. Express? Yeah, there we go. Okay, cool. So that should be type Express that we pass in there for some quick type scripting. So we're just saying that the app is being passed, that we're passing in is, the argument is an object that has a property called app that is of type Express, right? So what it's going to be doing is, like I said, setting up some basic information on our application. We're going to make a get and head. These are my status checkpoints I always add to my servers here. Again, this will indicate to us if the server is up or down when it's running. This is just a status checkpoint that I add to all of my servers to make sure that if I'm wondering if it's up or down. I will hit an endpoint here first thing and see if I get a positive or negative response. If I get a negative response, the whole thing is probably down. If I get a positive response, that means the server is still up and running. It's just that somewhere else is 500 erroring on, for example, a middleware or some endpoint somewhere down the line. This is just a great way to know the health of my server in general, right? So we need to also add trust proxy. And my note here for this was, this gives us real IP origin if we're behind a reverse proxy like Nginx or in Heroku or something like that. We just want to make sure that we get our real IP origins when we're trying to do some logging and debugging on our servers. This is also where we can include middlewares and things like that, which I did not install, but I guess we'll go ahead and do that. So, yeah, let's go install some middlewares, right? Because we got to make sure this sucker is up and running solidly. All right, so we're going to npmi. We'll start with helmet.js. It's a fantastic library that provides a lot of out-of-the-box protection for our Node Express applications. It's an Express middleware. It provides, like I said, a lot of just default protection against common hacks and attacks that you can customize with a huge configuration object. We'll talk about the bare bones to get up and running. I don't remember if it had any specific types or not, or if it comes with its own types these days. It's been a hot minute. Okay, it's deprecated, so we're going to npm uninstall -d helmet at types helmet. So I saw, this is my little personal test. If I see that deprecated warning saying it's a stub types, saying the stub types definition is deprecated, that means the library now includes its own typings, which is awesome. That's great that it does that now. So now that I got that up and running, I'm going to go ahead and just open a new window here to the right where I'll be running, what do I call this? The boiler server. And I'll be running it in this separate window here so I can install things and get up and running. So this is something a lot of the times I do in my own coding as well. I know the window doesn't exactly fit here, but I don't want to make the code, the terminals too squished depending on their size. Okay, there we go. Now that I got helmet up and running, we're going to add that as one of our primary middlewares. So we're going to say import helmet from the helmet library. And we're going to say, this is our list of middlewares, app.useHelmet. And we're going to add a configuration object that says content security policy false. I don't remember, didn't add a note of what that's supposed to do, but that's what I seem to do on all of my servers. I think that's for being able to mess with, well, we can just look at the documentation for it rather than me trying to make something up. Go take a look at helmet.js, folks. I am nothing but hashtag professional in this portion, y'all. What can I say? Because, like I said, out of the box, this call to the function of helmet as a middleware is fine. It applies a bunch of default stuff here. Yeah, so it looks like it's disabling a particular part of the middleware for helmet.js to false. And I'm guessing content security, but it's add layer security. You know, we're not gonna. I mean, I don't think it'll be very exciting watching me figure out what this is over the next 10 minutes. But evidently, it's something I tend to include outside of most of my middlewares. So I remember it giving me some issues with some issues. Let's see. Oh, it was providing. Let's see. Performs very little validation. You should rely on CSP checkers like CSP Evaluator instead. Okay, so it looks like it just does a quick little check on the content security policy and where it's coming from. And I remember running into a lot of annoying issues when building out my server and having it being talked to from other applications like my React Native apps and whatnot. That's what I'm remembering here. But clearly I included it for a reason in my notes. So let's go ahead and run with it. And you get in the comments and tell me what it actually is or tell me how wrong I am, which I'm very used to. Okay, so going back over here, we're going to install another one as well called CORS or Cross-Origin Resource Sharing. Considering all of our requests will be coming from various clients like React Native apps, a Next.js app, a Create React app, one of our own custom-made projects. Those are all going to be making fetch requests to this one mono server, which means that those are all cross-origin requests. So if you don't have a CORS package enabled, it will not allow those requests to come in. npm I development at types CORS. We'll see if that is Yeah, that's a package we're going to need right there. We're going to go ahead and do a quick copy paste. Set up cores. There we go. And from there, we're going to use app.use cores. There we go. Next, we're also going to include our body parsers. So we'll say app.use express.json as one of our body parsers. We'll go ahead and include express.url encoded types as well. Cool. That way we can parse either of those. If someone wants to send us like an HTTP, like a URL encoded form, then we can handle those. Or if they want to do just JSON, we can handle those as well. It's nice to have both enabled right there as well. And one of my favorite loggers right here, we're going to go ahead and do a npm I of Morgan. It's fantastic Express middleware for logging where our API requests are going. Let's see if it has its own types. We're good. All right. App use, and we'll say Morgan. There we go. Use that Morgan middleware. And we'll pass it a type of dev. Now we can also include this on our log levels. So meaning like I will use a different log in production than I do surprise in development. So let's head to our config index, actually our environment variable here. Well, I will say our Morgan in this case is the string value of dev. So I added that to my environment variable. We're going to head to our config index and include this now as well, where I will say maybe this is a property called logs Morgan process .env, stop it, .env.morgan right there will be that particular thing. Because we're going to include some, in a future video, we're going to add a custom logger called Winston to the server boilerplate as well. But okay, that right there is set up, which means I now have to import it. So I'll say import config from up1 directory to the config directory. And then we're going to say, instead of just writing dev directly, we're going to say use our config.logs.morgan level for us if you would so please. From there, we don't have any routes or middlewares yet. Hello, Percy. My cat Percival is right in front of the monitor to make sure I can't see what I'm typing. Come say hello. Like I said, he knows when to come in my videos. What can I say? But he's not going to come say hello. Here, buddy. Say hi for the camera. This is Percival DeRollo. He has destroyed a number of the furniture in the house, every single blind in the house, and will constantly distract me on videos and come beg for attention or block my notes monitor, which is what he's trying to do right now. He likes to curl up right outside of frame here. I need to get like a cat camera that looks at him. But he uses this part of my desk as my bed, and it blocks the monitor where I have my notes where I do my video recordings. He's back for more attention. All right, I'm not going to edit this out because people... who doesn't like having cats come ruin things in videos? I mean, it's just like what they're, and it's like what they're genetically made to do. Well, pick a spot, buddy. It's like he wants me to pick him up and want attention, but at the same time he doesn't. And he's gonna get antsy if I just keep him here in my lap for a bit. So we don't have our middlewares for handling global errors, which I've done in a different video series. So I might do them in the next one here, but I want to, this is basically like, and this is where, for example, where you would do an app.use, if we had them, all of our routes and whatever API prefix you think they're going to need here. So this is where I would include all of my global routes. I'd import them and use them here, which will probably, again, with this video already being almost 40 minutes by this point, we'll have to do it in a separate video. So this is not like an hour, 2 hour long adventure singular video. I mean, I got to cut this stuff for content, right? So yeah. This would happen if you think this is enough to get yourself up and running here. So yeah, that looks good. Now, this is what's going to set up our Express application with a whole bunch of custom functionality. And like I said, we're going to have it being as a loader. So what we're going to do here is head to our loaders index TS file, because now we're going to be actually building this sucker out. So I'm going to say import the Express loader from that particular file. We also need to have our type application. No, it's Express is what we're doing, I thought. Yeah, from Express. And we're going to make another function, export async function. And we've been doing default, so I guess we're going to keep keep it 55th Street. There we go. Yeah, and we're going to say app express. There we go. And we're going to say that when we pass it in here, we're going to await the express loader. We're going to pass in the app as that arg, and I'm going to console log express loaded. There we go. And that's it. We're going to be doing these basic 2 lines of code for every other loader we're going to have, like MySQL, Passport, Mongo, Postgres, whatever y'all want to use, cron jobs, job loader, scheduler. All those things you're going to configure as a function called loader that's going to take the app as an arg and pass it in, and be good to go from there, right? Or you don't have to pass in the app. Like MySQL loader is just going to load itself asynchronously. I don't want to have to bother, I don't need to bother passing in the app when I'm setting up MySQL. But yeah, that's what that loader index is going to look like. And then what we need to do now is actually call this from our app level. I want to do this dynamically and asynchronously. So what we're actually going to do is do a little cheese here and say await import. We don't want to import anything until this thing actually gets up and off the ground and running. Now, because this is a default export, we're going to say whatever the default function is. We're going to pass in our app as the arg, and it looks like TypeScript editing is happy here. So yeah, this is just a little dynamic import cheese we're doing here to keep it running asynchronously only when our server starts and not before via an import statement up here. So that's what we're doing down here, right? Percival, I swear, dude. Oh yeah, check it out. We got Express loaded, and it's running on server port 3000. So it asynchronously loaded all that Express stuff on our server, and then when that got up and running, it started everything in the build process here. So, oh my goodness. I've been saying this in every video, but if you want to be a successful YouTuber, don't get a cat, because they really do just come and ruin everything at the most inopportune times. All right. Now we got to do another loader for MySQL, probably because the student's going to be using that anyway from that question because they're part of our bootcamp. So we're going to say, let's go ahead over here and say import from MySQL. We want it to have our create pool, and we need to type as well, but I'll include that on a new line. And I'll have to import our config from our config directory. I'm going to import a type called pool connection. So we have that type from MySQL. There we go. And I need to now connect to it. So here's what we're going to do. Const. Now, in production, we may have several different types of connections, like a connection for reads specifically, like select statements, and a connection for writes, like inserts, updates, and deletes potentially. So we can have several pools here. So I'm going to go ahead and just set up an object, but we're going to have one property for now, and this is where you would include more later, because it needs to be loaded asynchronously, and it also needs to connect to our database, which will, again, have to happen asynchronously. So we're going to have this object here, and rather than exporting it out, we're going to have to export out a function that acts as a getter to grab this pool connection so we can run our queries at a later time. So I will say, by default, export out a function. I guess it doesn't matter what it's called. We're going to call it the maybe pool get or something like that. That should return to us a return type of the pool connection right there. And it's going to return state.pool. There we go. And then as well, we need to have it asynchronously load this stuff. So I will say export. So I realize this type needs to be our named export. So we're going to call this export function get, so we can get the MySQL pool connection to do something with it. And our default one will be the loader, right? So that'll be export default async. It doesn't need to have a name because by default function, bada bing, bada boom, no arg. And all it's going to do is assign that property object to be the create pool function, which I realize we don't have the environment variables for. So this will vary depending on what you're doing, but we'll just say I'll have a localhost connection. We'll do db underscore user equals, again, I have this one for my students for quick demos, which is why I know this is something I could do. I don't know what database I'll be using here. Do I have just a dumb one I can use? I know I said I wasn't going to bring up the workbench. Sorry. I just want to pull up like a dumb database that I could use here. You think I know one off the top of my head of all the garbage I have. Blog Boss, Blog LOL. I have some dumb names for these things. Yeah, we'll do join us. Okay. I should have just thought of that one. It's like a it's a stupid MySQL table of users and I auto-generated like 500 users to show my students some cool select statement tricks they could do. Anyway, yeah, so there we go. Set up our database connection. So now in my config, need to add this here. We'll say this will be our config.mysql connection, where I'll have my hosts, which will be process.env.db_hosts. Copy, paste, paste, paste. This will be our user, db user. This should be our password property, db pass, and this is the database property for MySQL, and I called it schema because it's a better name. There we go. All right, that way I can go over here and simply say config.mysql, and that should configure with that object. There we go. And to test it, what we're going to do is, surprise, surprise, copy, paste. We'll call this the MySQL loader, the database connection from the MySQL file. Wait, MySQL loader to run, and then console log MySQL loaded. And there we go. And confirming. Hey, it connected to the MySQL database just fine. I didn't get any kind of authentication error or problem with it with a typo. It correctly loaded the express settings I want in my application and successfully started the server all super fast. So yeah, from there, yeah, I guess I'll have to make another video. There's no way I didn't think I was going to fit everything in one video here without it being a long, meandering journey. But hopefully you can see where we're headed towards here, where keeping things in functions is great for testing when we add that in the future. Keeping things based in modules and being loaded individually keeps things very fast and piecemealed, and again, will fail fast should something fail. There's some cool tricks we've already showcased here. I'll push this to GitHub and include it in my, what's it called? And include it in the description of this video so y'all can find it and instead of trying to follow along this video or like backtracking every time I'm talking or rambling or trying to figure out the definition of something live on camera like an idiot. Yeah, that way you don't have to follow along and try and jump around the video to find out where I talked about or wrote something, so you can just always go to GitHub and take a look at how I wrote it. So even though that was why I made the video, because I didn't want to just give somebody a repository, so go figure, I contradict myself at the end compared to the beginning. But yeah, this is a pretty good starting point, and in the next video, we'll add some universal middlewares for our Express. I'll add some basic auth logic with Passport. We'll build out our root API routes for some demonstrations, build out our database query and basic model, since I'm choosing not to use an ORM on this one, and maybe talk about some simple type stuff. So yeah, I'll see you all in the next video where we continue on building this this awesome little server right here. So ta-ta for now, and make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.